The insects of Jiang began to explode near Zhu Yuanxian, creating a bunch of explosions. In the midst of the explosions was Zhu Yuanxian, who started to stare intently at Zhang Xuanzi with a penetrating gaze. He knew that the technique that Zhang Xuanzi had used was just an illusion. If he used all the power he had accumulated throughout his life, maybe he would be able to break the illusion. Being in a life-or-death situation, there was no longer any need to hold back or think about the consequences. He was determined to break the illusion and escape from Great Xia. Without wasting another second, he used the forbidden spell called the Power of Divine Soul, successfully breaking Jiang Xuanzi's illusion. Zhu Yuanxian's body began to emit a powerful red energy, and just before the explosions could harm him, he moved out of range of the explosions and began to advance towards Zhang. Zhang, who was flying in the air, looked down, and upon seeing that Zhu Yuanxian was alive and approaching, he could not help but become alert and think that this was bad. Zhu Yuanxian drew the sword and with a look full of hatred and rage asked Zhang to prepare to die. Zhang put his arm in front of his face to defend himself, and his eyes filled with fear and surprise. He did not expect that he would be able to break the seal of the god of war and escape alive from the explosions. Zhu Yuanxian, who was filled with rage, approached Zhang to attack. He put his arms in front of his face to defend himself from the attack, but just at that a powerful blue lightning bolt of energy appeared and pierced Zhu Yuanxian's chest, leaving Zhang somewhat confused. Due to the pain, Zhu Yuanxian opened his mouth and began to spit blood. His eyes were full of surprise as he did not know what was happening. The energy transformed into an arrow, leaving him immobilized. This energy was being controlled by the invincible sword god Ling Qiu, who told him that it was all over. If he moved another centimeter, he would ensure that Zhu Yuanxian's head fell to the ground and his soul was completely destroyed. Zhu Yuanxian was shocked. He could not believe that even Ling Qiu was against him. At first, Zhang remained observing in silence without interrupting. But then he realized that this was the perfect opportunity to attack. He began to look at Zhu Yuanxian with a gaze full of rage, extended his hand towards him, and started to release the insects. In the blink of an eye, the sky was once again filled with insects. Now that Zhu Yuanxian was seriously injured and could not move anymore, Zhang ordered the insects to self-destruct. Thousands of insects began to advance towards him and started to self-destruct, creating thousands of explosions. Zhu Yuanxian began to writhe in pain. He could not believe that they were doing this to him. He was the great general of the state, who had fought for the Great Xia, and had risked his life on countless occasions, suppressing waves of beasts, quelling rebellions, and even battling the order of the ancient gods. Little by little the insects and explosions started to devour his body. With a desperate look, he began to scream, saying that he was the central pillar of Daxia. Several seconds later, Zhang ordered the insects to stop exploding. Lin Qiu's attack had made a large hole in his chest, and the insects had already devoured his limbs. The body of Zhu Yuanxian descended to the ground and he fell to his knees. With a lost look, he began to look at the ground and asked Zhang if he was really going to kill an old man like him. Zhang also descended to the ground, and while his hand was surrounded by poisonous mist, he started laughing, revealing that he had already destroyed his physical body, and the only thing left now was his soul. He couldn't believe that he kept asking such stupid questions. Zhu Yuanxian was kneeling on the grass. He bowed his head before Zhang, and with a desperate look admitted that he and the Zhu family had been wrong. He was determined to compensate him in exchange for him forgiving his life. This was tempting for Zhang. He turned his head back and with a smile asked Master and Uncle Jiagang what they thought about this. Behind him were Hangyao, Gu Kaishan and Jiegang, who were shocked to see that Zhang wanted to spare the life of the guy who had tried to kill him. Zhang did not respond, and while the insects were devouring Zhu Yuanxian's body, he raised his head and with a look full of despair called the attention of the war god Zhang, asking him to save him. If he survived, then he was willing to go to the abyss to fight. Zhang Xuanji began to observe Yuanxian and started thinking about this tempting offer. He began flying above them. Zhu Yuanxian was the general of the war district of Jiangnan. Jiang Xuanji asked if he was willing to admit guilt for allowing the family forces of the Jiu family to oppress the market and seize it by force. Jiu Yuanxian, who was kneeling in front of Zhang, saw an opportunity to survive, and without losing another second, admitted to being guilty of everything. Zhang Xuanji began to look at him with a serious expression and explained that considering that he too had once made merits for the great Xia after compensating the merits and faults, small properties of the Jiu family were going to be confiscated, and Zhou Yuanxian was going to be marked with a seal on his soul and would be exiled to the battlefield of the abyss as a vanguard soldier who must fight until death. While the insects were devouring Zhou Yuanxian's body, his eyes filled with fear, but since he had no other option now, he accepted Zhang Xuanji's conditions. Upon hearing this, Zhang Xuanji began to point at him with his finger, and his finger started to emit a powerful golden energy. He used the ability called Soul Seal. A golden arrow made of energy shot out from his finger and pierced Jiu Yuanxian's back, causing him to start screaming in pain. If he ever thought about escaping, his soul would explode and he would disintegrate into dust. Not long after, Jiu Yuanxian lost consciousness and fell to the ground. Zhang, who was standing in front of him, began to observe him. He was surprised to see the power of one of the invincibles of Great Xia. He couldn't believe that just an illusion had such intimidating power. The objective of our boy had already been fulfilled and the threat from the Juyu family had been eliminated, so it was time to withdraw. While Zhang was lost in his thoughts, Zhang Xuanji, who had his arms behind his back, appeared behind him, asking if this verdict had calmed the fire of anger in his heart. Upon sensing his presence, Zhang came out of his trance and his eyes filled with surprise. He did not know what was happening. He turned around and with a nervous look replied that yes, explaining that the judgment of the god of war had been wise, revealing that in reality he was not angry, he just wanted to play it cool. Jiang Xuanji thought that our boy not only had exceptional talent, but also understood his own limits, knowing when to advance and when to retreat. Just for these two things, it had already been worth it for him to come today. Upon hearing this, Zhang thanked him for his appreciation. At that moment, Du and Feng approached them, began to point towards the sky with his finger, and with a surprised and panicked expression explained to the god of war that if the poisonous fog did not dissipate for a long time, he feared that this place could end up becoming an abyssal contamination. Zhang Xuanji started to look at the ground and remained thinking in silence, while on the other side, Zhang looked at the sky and seeing so many insects flying freely, thought that this was not good and decided it was time to order them to return. Zhang Xuanji began to look at the sky, snapped his fingers and decided it was time to purify the poisonous fog. A great explosion was created in the sky, eliminating all insects from the area. Upon seeing this, Zhang was left speechless and his eyes filled with surprise. He could not believe that Zhang Xuanji had dispersed the insects with a simple movement. According to him, this was somewhat terrifying. The golden arrow pierced Xiao Yuanshan's body. Zhang Xuanji crossed his arms, began to fly, and explained that as everyone had seen, they now had the power to suppress everything. He issued a new order for the country. Starting today, the rule of controlling taboos was abolished. Anyone who possessed a taboo but had a loyal heart for the country was considered a friend. Otherwise, they would be regarded as an enemy. He decided to take Xiao Yuanshan as an example. After explaining this, he started staring intently at Zhang with a penetrating gaze and began to think about what to do with him. Zhang started to worry a little. He began to look at Zhang Xuanji and remained silent, waiting for his decision. At that moment, Mu Hankyu's grandfather approached Zhang, placed a hand on his shoulder, extended the other one to the side, and with a confident smile explained that the god of war was wise. Since Jiang Chen had been raised with humility, he had a brave and just heart, full of purity. And although he would carry with him the taboo of 9 miasma wings, he was not going to harm Dzi. He, Mu Hainan, on behalf of the Mu family, was willing to take all responsibility as a guarantee. Zhang looked aside, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and surprised at the same time. For Zhang's luck, many people sided with him. Tang Wenchuan, representative of the Tang family, was also willing to take responsibility, and the military district of Jiangnan was also willing to support Zhang, welcoming him to join the army at the same time. Zhang Xuanji, who was flying in the sky, remained silent. Luo Sando began to push her father, advising him to also side with Zhang since many people had started doing so. The father's eyes filled with confusion, causing him to start sweating, but several seconds later, he began to blush and became filled with enthusiasm. He clenched his fists, closed his eyes and began to scream, saying that he was also willing to take responsibility. Luo Sando, who was behind him, put her hand on top of her head and thought that her father was useless. Hong Yao, who was sitting on the side then flying next to Gu Kaishan, was somewhat surprised to see that the god of war had not only intervened in the combat, but had also eliminated the rules about taboos. The prestigious elders were also defending Zhang. According to her, this seemed like a dream. Gu Kaishan, who had his arms crossed, thought that maybe Zhang Chen had thought of all this, and for this reason he had deliberately drawn his sword against Zhang Ge. Hong Yao was stunned and surprised at the same time to see that Zhang had such deep thoughts. Gu Kaishan began to look at Zhang with a serious expression and explained that the god of war was already aware of all the evils that Zhou Yuan Chen had done, and if it weren't for seeing Zhang Chen's extraordinary potential, he surely would not have acted so quickly. Everyone started to talk among themselves. Now that the 9 miasma wings had been exposed, if Zhang kept hiding, he was going to become the target of everyone. It was better to step forward and show all his potential. After all, a type of monster like the 9 miasma wings not only scared humans but also all the races of the abyss. Everyone began to worry since Zhang's insects had completely exploded, but one of them mentioned that there was no need to worry since with how smart Zhang Chen was, he surely had more insects hidden somewhere. Zhang began to observe them and couldn't help but smile, as this scene was just as he had wished. If one was going to show their hidden cards, then they had to do it with great fanfare. Zhang Xuanzi, who was flying, began to look at Zhang and seeing that everyone was willing to take responsibility for him. He explained that there was nothing more to say. He asked Zhang to take good care of himself and use the insects wisely. Zhang lowered his head before him and thanked him. Zhang Xuanzi, who had his arms crossed, with a suffocating gaze revealed that in 10 days, the great competition of prodigies would begin. The champion of this edition would be the first divine son of the prodigies, who would receive all privileges and resources equivalent to an 8th grade national protector. Upon hearing this, Zhang was somewhat surprised and thought that this prize was very tempting, but Zhang Xuanji also added that it was not allowed to use the 9 miasma wings. Zhang began to look at him with a calm gaze and started wondering if the god of war was doing all this for Zhang Weishuang, but then dismissed this since if it were only for him there would be no need to change the rules. He could not judge his greatness with a petty mind. With a determined look, Zhang promised not to use the 9 miasma wings in the prodigy competition. Upon hearing this, Zhang Xuanzi thought that he was worthy of being his apprentice as well. Zhang's eyes filled with concern. It didn't matter if he couldn't use the insects, since while completing the mission of the second change, he would be able to obtain a new mother insect. He thought that the war god wanted to see his true potential in the prodigy competition, and for this reason had forbidden him from using the insects. If this was the case, he was determined not to disappoint him. Zhang Xuanji, who had one hand behind his back, extended the other to one side, causing a crack to begin appearing. He decided it was time to clean up pending matters. Upon hearing this, others were somewhat confused since the poisonous mist of the abyss had been eradicated, so no one knew what else remained to be cleaned. Zhang Xuanzai ordered the Great Dreamer, commander of Dejia's night watch, to rise and get to work. The Great Dreamer was one of the 3 invincibles of Dejia. At that moment, someone who was holding a stuffed rabbit began to come out of the crack. This person also wore a hood with cat ears. The Great Dreamer was a woman wearing a cat costume, while with one hand she was holding the stuffed rabbit. She brought the other to her mouth and began to yawn as she was very sleepy. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,